Welcome, everybody. We're letting people in. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes so everyone can join properly. Thank you so much for being here with us in this webinar on water sustainability, focusing on how to ensure our future from a variety of perspectives. All the different stakeholders that are represented here. I'm sure we're going to have a great discussion. And without further ado, we can present the speakers that we have today. We're going to start with Dionisio Perez Blanco. He's working at CMCC, and he's going to present the status quo on risk assessment and adaptation strategies on water. If we can go to the next slide, we can see all the speakers that we have today. Myself, I will be talking to you a little bit about the Agora project that we are running concurrently in 4 different countries. We have pilots that are testing different ways of engaging citizens to face different climate-related risks. One of them, of course, being related to water, which is why we're going to focus on some of the results that we got in a pilot that we are running in Spain, and specifically with the drought that took place in Catalonia region. Afterwards, we're going to have a representative from the Organization of American States, Mauricio Serna. He's going to present the challenges and solutions in transboundary water management. Of course, when 2 countries have to join forces and address some of these issues, there's a lot of other complexities. So it's important for us to learn that as well. After that, we're going to get into understanding the stakeholder engagement of youth particularly, and Rosario Arnau, who represents the International Water Association, specifically the Young Water Professionals in Spain, is going to share with us some insights on how this can be tackled from that perspective, knowing that, the younger generations are going to be the ones that will be taking the lead on these issues moving forward. And last but not least, it's our privilege to be able to hear what the private sector is doing to address the same issue. So Marmico is going to present the advancements in water treatment and management, representing Acciona. I'm sure it's going to be a phenomenal afternoon. And if we go to the next slide, we want to encourage everybody to ask questions. That is why we're going to share a link in a little bit so that everyone can access this platform called Slido. If you have not used it just yet, you will see that when you click on the link, you will automatically be redirected to a website where you can just write down your question. We're going to accumulate all the questions. And at the end of the session, we're going to answer all of them. You can address the question to any speaker talking about the different perspectives of this major topic. And if we don't have time at the end of the session to answer all the questions, rest assured that we're going to gather all of them and then send the feedback per email in the next few days. So do not stop yourself from asking any doubts that you may have or curiosities that you may want to know. We will be happy to share that with you afterwards. So I believe if we are all ready, I see that almost everybody has already joined. Here is the link. You can scan the QR code, or our colleague Martina has shared here with us the link. Again, we're going to take a question and answer session at the end. And we're going to close today with some guidelines from the EU Mission Adaptation to Climate Change, with if we have any representatives from regions or communities that may want to gather more information or get involved with some of these activities. She's going to share with us how they can do that. So I believe without further ado, we can start with our first speaker. Dionisio, the floor is yours.
Okay, great, thank you. So hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation, Marina, others, for being here today. My name is Dionisio Perez. I'm a researcher at CMCC and Universidad de Salamanca in Italy and Spain. Today I'm going to talk about the status quo on risk assessment and adaptation strategies on water, trying to provide a storyline on what has been the recent developments in the tools that we are using for risk assessment and how they have been driven by need. Well, what's the status today and what we need to develop further into the future. So next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, to start the presentation, I would like to provide a little bit of a background. So why are we talking about the status quo on risk assessment and adaptation strategies on water? Well, historically, when it comes down to talk about water, what we typically did as water research experts or basically policy advisors or policymakers was about supply infrastructures. So we were mostly concerned about building new dams, building new canals, building new aqueducts, whatever. And this has been the case since Roman times in the case of Europe. But I mean, also the Chinese civilization or the Mayans in South America have been doing that for a long time. But if we go to the next slide, I think it's 2 clicks. Yeah, 2 clicks. So this is changing nowadays. This paradigm is a model is coming to an end, and this is because basically the cost of providing new water is increasing exponentially. Here I provide an example of the Segura River Basin in southern Spain. The Segura River Basin in southern Spain, so eastern Spain, I should say, is casebook study of how water resources have been exploited to the limit, and we are in a situation in which making new water resources available is increasingly expensive to the point that users cannot pay for that. So here you can see what happens over the years when you are relying on a supply-based model. You start using surface water. The surface water is the cheapest source, but has limits. Of course, water is a limited resource. Then we built a water transfer that, by the way, generated a huge conflict between the two regions, the donor basin and the receiving basin, the Castilla-La Mancha and the Murcia regions, and this has been tagged as the Spanish water wars. Then we started to rely, well, before that, we started to rely on groundwater, but the problem is that as the piezometric level falls down, this has been increasingly expensive, and obviously this has a cost that users are less and less willing to pay. And then we have moved to alternative water resources such as wastewater and, last but not least, desalinated water. The problem is that these sources are increasingly expensive, and essentially users, mainly farmers in this case, cannot pay for it. It's like a buffer stock that they use only where a drought hits, and they have to rely on these extremely expensive, because they are comparatively speaking extremely expensive sources of water because the others are not available. Essentially, for example, to save the life of perennial crops. So next slide, please. Okay, this paradigm is changing and it's coming to an end. And in the new paradigm, we are trying to rely on nature-based solutions, economic instruments, regulatory instruments, etc. The problem that we have with these instruments, and this key, is that instead of increasing supply, we are talking about redistribution. So we are not addressing the need of all users by making more water available. What we are doing is, okay, we have this amount of water available, which is limited. We know that we have these users, and relinquish his or her water use. And obviously that has important socioeconomic consequences. So we are shifting from managing supply to managing demand, and the latter has proven to be very challenging. And this is basically what we need to incorporate into the mixed economics. And we are talking, when we talk about water resources, we are talking about socioeconomic aspects and not only about natural science topics. This has also required that we adapt the tools that we are using for managing the water resources and for informing our decisions, but also that we adapt decision making. And that means that we need to adapt the tools, of course, but also the people who are using the tools. And this is even more challenging. So next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to provide here an example of how this paradigm shift is unfolding. This is a study that we did actually with the group of Jardo Misiak at CMCC a few years ago, in which we are showing what are the impacts of reducing water allocation in Regione Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy. And what you can see here is that there are important asymmetries in the impacts on regions. When you reduce by the water allocation by 5, 35, 20, or 50%, some areas can cope with this with relatively small losses, when in other areas the losses are much more significant. This is showing us that, I mean, even if we try to build an approach of water management based on equity, the impacts are going to be asymmetric, and we have to develop tools to manage them, such as, for example, voluntary agreements, which is the case of the Memorandum of Understanding or Protocollo d'Intesa in Italy, or the water markets in a more extreme example in areas like Australia or Western United States. So next slide, please. Okay, the problem that we have when we try to address water-related problems is that we tend to think about water management as a local issue. In reality, it's not. I mean, water is a resource that has to be managed locally, of course, but the local management has repercussions that typically transcend the area in which the water is being managed and used. And in this case, for example, we are showing you what happens when we implement water restrictions in the agricultural areas of Emilia-Romagna. And as you can see, the impacts are felt regionally, but also at the national level. And if we had a European map, you could see that also at the European level, you have impacts, which can be positive or negative, depending on what regions are being affected by the drought and what regions are benefiting somehow from the lower production of the drought-affected regions by increasing their exports. In this case, it's let's say a simulation, so it's not a real drought. It's an example that in which we assume that the drought was only hitting Emilia-Romagna, which is completely unrealistic. We know that in reality, droughts do not recognize any borders, but it's just for the sake of giving an example of how these shocks can cascade from the local to the regional and even national and supranational levels. So next slide. And the next one, because I will skip this one for the sake of simply this one. The next one will come again. The previous one will come again in a slide. To apply a more sustainable way of using water, we need to rely on different tools. We are not saying, we are talking about socioeconomic modeling, we are talking about integrating socioeconomic and hydrological models, but of course there are many tools that we have to use. One of them is remote sensing. And when we are using remote sensing, we have to be aware, we are using remote sensing models and we are combining different sources of data. We have to be aware of uncertainty. Here I'm showing you a key aspect, what has become, in our opinion at least, a key aspect in the assessment and adaptation to water scarcity, at least in this case, which is the uncertainty that can propagate via inputs. So here what I'm showing you is essentially the effects of a policy in central Spain, which is a buyback policy. Essentially what we wanted to know in this study is what will be the price of buying water back from the users, in this case from farmers. And we are informing this policy using 3 alternative sources of water use data. We are using the conventional water source, which is the green one here, a novel water source information system that was implemented in Spain 10 years ago, which is the red one, and the blue one. So the policy assessment can be extremely different. In this case, we are talking of an order of magnitude difference between the purple and the yellow and the green one. And this is essentially because using a different data source, which in the beginning may not be that relevant, the differences may not be that significant, their impacts cascade across the models, in this case, economic and hydrological models, and in the end, the price of reacquiring the water can be 10 times larger, or smaller, depending on the water source that you are considering. This is very important because in Spain, we had a previous experience in which we implemented a buyback in this same area. And the situation was that the public sector planned to use 60 million euro to reacquire 200 million cubic meters. And in the end, they used the 60 million euro, but they only acquired 13 million cubic meters. So it was a complete failure and a complete waste, if I may say, of public resources because the target was not acquired. And this is very much related to the data inputs that we were using, which were poorly informed. We are not saying that the data that we have, we will want to claim that the data that we have now with remote sensing is much better. I think it's better. It's a more reliable source of data for at least for water use. But in the end, is data source that is also prone to uncertainty, biases, etc. So what I try to highlight here is that when we are doing policy analysis, a key aspect is to take into account uncertainty and acknowledge uncertainty and communicate uncertainty to those who are going to define the strategies for water resource management. So next slide, please. Okay, here is another source of uncertainty that I also wanted to to highlight. When you are conducting any sort of analysis, you can rely on your model. And of course, we know that basin authorities who are in the end doing most of the water planning. They have their models. They rely on Aquatool in Spain. They rely on Rivasim in some basins in Italy and South and North Africa. So they have their own system models, WIP, whatever, and they tend to rely on them. What we are trying to show here is that depending on the model that you use, the results will be different, which is perhaps not surprisingly, and not surprising, but it's something that you have to take into account when you are designing a policy. Because sometimes, if you don't consider these differences between models, you can be surprised. This is, for example, the case of Lebanon, where you have a considerable wide range of responses depending on the model you are using. But if you go to the next slide, please. What we are showing here is the case of the Piedmont region in northwestern Italy. In this case, changing the model has important implications on the results. Okay, so for example, if you are taking a look at what happens when you implement a water price in the Piedmont region, depending of using in this case, the straight line is a PMP model. What you see is that the response that you would expect from a farmer in terms of water use is very smooth. But if you shift to a different model, the response can be very abrupt. That's basically because of the structure of the model that you have adopted. It's not related to the input, it's related to the shape of the model. So depending on the model that you're using, the results can be different. And this is something that is rarely acknowledged, but I mean, recently in the context of some Horizon Europe projects in which some EU river basin authorities are involved, we are trying to change this approach, and we are trying to make managers acknowledge the relevance of the model that they are using, the tool they are using in the results that they are obtaining. And this is something that is being also incorporated now into the water resource management. So next slide, please. Okay, and then to finish my presentation, I hope I didn't take much time. I want to reflect a bit about how these tools can be adopted by policymakers. So next slide, please. What I want to highlight here is that in order to have policies that are adopted by the policymakers, whatever strategies we define, whatever models we define, whatever inputs we use, this information has to be actionable. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, great. Here we are showing an example of how these models can be done actionable. By no means this is the only way, but it's an example of something we are doing in the context of the Horizon Europe project Transcend, and also the Horizon Europe project Calanoa Water. Here you have an example of how these very complex models that are used by scientists and decision makers, but especially by scientists, can be conveyed to stakeholders, including decision makers. Okay, so you have the left-hand side an example of a modeling framework in which you have climate models, climate change scenarios, alternative hydrological models, alternative water management models, alternative water management scenarios, and alternative socioeconomic models, all of them combined, in which you are going to have a wide range of forecasting results using an ensemble. And you have obviously a difficulty communicating these to stakeholders, because the stakeholders are not experts in all of these models. They are not experts, probably they don't know much about uncertainty. They are looking for a point prediction. They don't want to, I mean, they are probably not even prepared to think about how to manage risk and uncertainty in predictions. So one way to communicate this to stakeholders is by using serious gaming. So this is an example of a serious game that we conducted in Spain. In this case, I think it's the project Irene. In which essentially what we did was transform all the outputs from the models into cards. And we made the stakeholders play a simplified game that represented the basics of the models. And by simplifying all the complex results into cards and making them play with a board card game on a table, discussing key aspects, etc., we got a much better feedback as compared to another workshop in which we did a separate experiment and used the models themselves. So here, what I want to highlight is that communication, how we communicate the tools, how we communicate the results, is also critical for the success of adaptation strategies. Well, please, next slide. This is just another example of another game that we conducted, in this case in Tunisia and Lebanon. There in the left-hand side, you have some examples of areas in which we have been conducting these experiments, trying to convey the modeling that we develop at CMCC and Adaptation to the users in different case study sites. And That's it. I think there's one more slide to acknowledge typical disclaimer here. I mean, the research has been supported by different projects, of course. Here you have their logos, and if you want to learn more about them, just go to their website. And then next slide, just to say thank you to everyone. And in case you have any questions, comments, happy to listen to them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dionisio. And I think it's quite insightful to see how we can translate that scientific language into ways that regular citizens can understand that, which is a little bit of what we were testing, right? We were also trying to understand when we are planning adaptation strategies, actually when we're in the step of designing them, how can we get different stakeholders involved? Because part of the success is that everyone is able to be a part of that conversation, and that's going to make you be a little bit more convinced. So we're going to talk a little bit about the experience that we're having with the Agora project. Also, this is an ongoing project, so we still have a long way to go until the end of next year. But so far, we've been having some interesting feedback when testing the waters with average citizens. So in this case, we're going to complement a little bit what Dionisio was explaining before with the perspective of the average Jane and Joe that live in any city that might be exposed to climate-related issues. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to introduce a little bit what this project is about. So it started last year in January. CMCC is the organization that coordinates it, and we have different partners all across Europe. The idea is that we can promote active community engagement. What we want is citizens to be directly involved in climate action so that they can support and also, of course, accelerate those adaptation processes. In some instances, there's been a pathway, a roadmap already planned, and in others, the citizens are expected to be co-designers of those plans and adaptation strategies. The idea is that they can collaborate with different institutions and local actors so that they can be a part of that social transformation. And of course, we also take a look and analyze the daily policies and practices. Through a multidisciplinary approach, we are integrating that scientific knowledge and technical knowledge with the expertise that regular citizens might also have. If we can go to the next slide, we will see a little bit of the 4 areas where we're working on. We are having pilots, right, that are in the 4 countries that you can see here on your left-hand side, in Germany, in Sweden, in Spain, and also in Italy. What we have is one specific pilot. Those are the cities that you see mentioned in the slide: Dresden, Malmo, Zaragoza, and also Rome. And then in each of these countries, we have different regions, communities, cities, and also other type of stakeholders, such as universities or non-governmental organizations that follow closely what is happening in this pilot. Because we have conducted inception workshops and focus groups with citizens that live in those cities so that we can understand what are their views regarding climate-related issues that affect the city where they live in, how do they think that they should be managed, and what are the different approaches that they consider to be perhaps barriers or limitations, and also vulnerabilities. So that with that mapping, we can identify the key areas where we need to work with closer attention. Those pilot regions are one area that Agora is working on. We are also testing in those pilot regions the different citizen engagement methodologies that can be useful. And maybe what we can tell you is that depending on the type of stakeholder, we're going to have different type of citizen engagement methodologies that might be more effective. To support all this, we are creating a pool of digital tools. We have a community hub and then 2 digital academies that are currently already live that will support regions and communities that are transitioning into creating their adaptation plans and strategies. But also they can support any regular citizen that wants to learn more about how to use climate-related data and also to tackle disinformation. And by the end of this year, we're going to also have a smartphone app that will allow citizens to, again, in a gamified way, learn more about climate-related risks. Now, this is a little bit of the overview, and behind the scenes of all of this, we're also analyzing the different policies that exist in the countries that we are studying, so that we can also compare and test which of them can be more effective and how did the countries come up with those policies, what were the mechanisms that they used to finally decide on that particular policy or strategy. Let's go to the next slide, because in this presentation, we want to focus on the specifics of climate engagement, citizen engagement and climate action. The idea is that we can involve a broad audience, right? So that the strategy and the policy can be as effective as possible. Here, the relevance, the credibility, legitimacy, the collective ownership, and also the understanding that citizens have is going to be crucial to ensure the success. Because of this, we considered that while we were studying one particular pilot in Spain, in a different region, an adaptation strategy was being implemented because the level of drought was so significant that the threshold had been surpassed and the mechanisms were in motion to have the different restrictions and limitations to the usage of water. So we can go to the next slide, we will see a little bit of the overview. In the year 2022, as well as 2023, the region of Catalonia in Spain, so northeast, faced a severe continuous drought. Now, this, of course, as I just mentioned, marked the beginning of the implementation of this adaptation strategy plan. So in February 2024, the regional government declared a state of emergency, and they started implementing those climate change policies and adaptation strategies. Now, as we are not studying specifically that region, we realized, can we take this as an opportunity? Because everybody in the country had the information and they knew that in some areas, the drought had become so severe that those strategies were being implemented. And so our questions were key in regards to the involvement, the knowledge, and the links that these citizens that were now subject to those policies had regarding the specific measures that they now were seeing in their day-to-day lives. So we wanted to know what they knew beforehand about those adaptation strategies, how had information trickled down to them before, and also if they were fully aware of those climate-related risks or not. So if we go to the next slide, we will see a little bit of the overview. We had a wide range of respondents, but for the most part, they were millennials, so youngsters between the ages of 26 and 35. They were highly educated, and the majority were female. We had greater responses from women rather than from men. Now, this also can mark who might be more prone or more likely to participate in some of those activities. If we go to the next slide, we will see that we had, of course, a number of questions, but the most important takeaways for us in this meeting are three areas: the knowledge and trust levels, the participation and adaptation efforts, and the willingness to get involved, as well as the willingness to pay. So these two elements, the first one, willingness to get involved, for us was really important because we wanted to see if when you are subject to the particular aspects of an adaptation strategy, when you are, for example, limited to the usage of water, this is something that you might not suffer on a daily basis and might make you question the adaptation strategy or might make you want to know more, hence being more directly involved in those specific activities. So if now, while you are suffering, quote unquote, or being subject to the limitation of the usage of water resources, you receive an invitation to participate in a town hall, maybe you're more likely to do that rather than in a situation where you're not seeing either the significant climate risk effect or the adaptation plan being implemented. So we had several questions that we're not going to include in this presentation regarding other topics, but for us, it was very key to learn more about also whether they trusted, citizens trusted the decision makers, and also the final adaptation initiatives that had been decided. So let's go to the next slide so we can see a little bit of the results. Regarding that first aspect, the willingness to participate, the majority said that they were willing to participate in any circumstance. So 54% were aligned with that. But we also had a 33% that said if the situation were to continue, they would want to get more involved. So we have only 13% that are a little bit skeptical and uninterested, but the majority of citizens do want to be a part of the conversation. And this is very important for decision makers to know. And now we need to find which is the best way to share knowledge, share information with them, and also get them to be a part of the conversation and in what capacity. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that we have also to face a situation where there's significant amount of people that have either a low confidence or a neutral confidence in the authorities, particularly regarding climate change adaptation strategies. So how can we revert this situation? Perhaps if we were able to get more citizens involved in the discussion and the reevaluation of the policies, this could be a way to increase the level of trust. This is said to be one of the most important factors. So knowledge is one and trust is the other, so that citizens really get involved and are actually moving forward with the implementation of those strategies. If we move to the next slide, we will see also the perception that citizens have. So we can see here that there's significant perception on the climate change being the result of a combination of natural factors and also human activity. We can see that a percentage of them that can be added to this focuses specifically on human activity. And then there's a little bit of a distribution between industrial production, human activity related to agriculture, livestock, and fishing. And then we have the least amount being people that believe that climate change is linked to natural factors and is completely unlinked, unrelated to human activity. So what we can say is that we have citizens that are quite aware of climate change and the causes of climate change, but perhaps they don't feel that they have been involved enough in the discussion, or that the conclusions, the adaptations that have been proposed so far, and maybe this is also the perspective after they have been living through the implementation, might not be the most adequate. So if we go to the last slide that we have regarding this particular survey and the insights that we got from this and how we can integrate them into our project, we can say that they are very, very, very aware of climate change, but they are not sufficiently informed about the adaptation policies in the region where they live, which is also something important for us, because focusing on communication and making sure that all citizens know that there is a climate adaptation policy, that there are strategies in place, can also be a crucial factor to ensure the success of them. Now, in this framework, we have also some other findings, which are that they have a low to neutral trust in authorities. This is something else that we're going to be focusing on, different methodologies and strategies where this can be modified, because you need to have trust in who is designing your adaptation policies. And the best part is that they are open to getting involved in climate change adaptation initiatives. I think this is one of the greatest takeaways. And the fact that when the major circumstances, the force majeure event is happening, it can be a great opportunity to carry out different activities, implement different methodologies to involve citizens, because that's when you can get the two biggest cohorts together. The ones that are willing to participate regarding of the circumstances, and those that are willing to participate because they see the effect of climate-related events. Now, the keys that we are taking and we are still testing in terms of stakeholder engagement is that being transparent regarding the activities, the conclusions, and also how their input is integrated into decision-making plans and strategies is crucial. We also got this from the pilot that we were conducting in Rome, The City of Rome launched this year in 2024 the adaptation strategy, and literally in the adaptation strategy, acknowledgement to the activities carried out with the citizens and citizen engagement initiatives were mentioned. So that is part of that loop and closing the loop that a lot of the citizens want to see. I don't want to participate in activities or methodologies and not know what's going to happen with that later. I want to make sure that my participation and my time is put to good use and that I will be able to contribute to something greater. This, of course, combination with the needs of the population and analyzing, how are we going to control the implementation of those plans and strategies? And the best part, which is the one that we are tackling in Agora, there's great room for co-design and co-creation of strategies. So I want to thank you all for your attention. We're going to go to the last slide. This is our platform. If you guys want to scan the QR code and join a little bit the newsletter and follow the project, you'll be able to know how we're progressing with this. But I want to thank you for your time. And Martina has already shared in the chat the link to Slido. So if there are any questions, on my presentation, but also on the one that we had before with Dionisio and the ones that we will be having afterwards, we will be happy to answer them at the end of today's session. So thank you very much. And I think now we can move on to our next presentation that we have. Mauricio Serna, representing the Organization of American States. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Please extend greetings from Andres Sanchez, our senior specialist and officer in charge of the water program for the Americas. The Americas Water Program. He had to attend an unscheduled event, for this reason I'm participating on his behalf. Well, next slide, please. Just to introduce briefly the Organization of American States. The Organization of American States is the world's oldest regional organization, dating back for the first International Conference of American States held in Washington, D.C. But as organization, OAS came into being in 1948. And according to the OAS chart, the Organization of American States have 4 pillars. First of one, democracy, human rights, security, and development. Water-related issues fall under the development pillar. And in the field of water resources, the Organization of American States has been promoting the management of water resources and shared ecosystems to enhance water security in transboundary basins such as the Plata Basin River, which involves Argentina, Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Bolivia. The Upper Lempa Basin River, which is shared for Argentina and Bolivia, the Trifinio region shared by Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, among others. And well, talking about water resources, there are several gaps in governance, knowledge management, financing, and technical capacities. And facing all these issues is crucial to achieve water security in each watershed and in the whole region. For the next slide, please. Okay, just to know how to know the organization of our section. As I mentioned, we have 4 pillars: democracy, human rights, security, development. One of them has a specific secretariat. The pillar of democracy have the secretariat for Strength and Democracy, Human Rights has a specific secretariat for access to human rights and equity. Security, the same, it has the Secretariat for Multidimensional Security, and the pillar and development pillar has a specific secretariat, which is the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development. In the next slide, you will see that America's Water Program is part of the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development, which is part of the Department of Sustainable Development. We're located on this department. And as program, we're working for more than 16 years promoting water diplomacy in all the Americas. And we invest more than $1 million investing to support countries. We're executing more than 116 projects and activities related to developing cooperation and peace around water resources, focusing on knowledge management, agreement facilitation, capacity building, creation of partnership and hubs, and promote water engagement in shared basin and river ecosystems. It's pretty important taking consideration this agreement facilitation because we work together with our member states, and as a result of them, the Americas has several very important international organizations. For example, La Plata Basin River has a specific organization to management this river, Trifino region as well, and we work together to implement and develop these institutions. The next slide, please. Okay, how do we drive the change? We're facing several issues. One of them is related to science, knowledge management and scientific production, because there are a lot of institutions, a lot of knowledge, but there's a lack in scientific governance. For that reason, we're working with organizations like NASA, for example, in order to enhance, to help to support our country states. And also we're working with regional organizations at OTCA, for example, which is very important for the Amazon Basin, ALT, es organización que es una organization who administrate the Lake Titicaca between Peru and Bolivia, and SIG Plata in the La Plata Basin River, and to support in a financial way this organization, we mobilize funds of international funds, for example, JEF, IKI Cooperation, USAID, CAF, International Development Bank, and another international cooperations. So we always work together, focusing on knowledge management and scientific and science organizations, political and regional organization, and regional and regional mechanisms, as well as international support mechanisms. In the next slide, please, you will see why we're working now in climate change and in these basin rivers, because the 30% of the countries are located in the category of extreme vulnerability, according to some analysis that we did with IDB. And over 50% of the LAC population lives in countries located in areas of extreme and high climate vulnerability. And the effects of drought and floods also pose a complex scenario for sustainable development. For example, it's estimated that 53 million of people in Latin American, Caribbean countries were affected by drought, and 41 million suffered the consequence of floods. And in this context, in this panorama, the economic losses are calculated between more than $10 million due to the lack of water, and 26 million are affecting for damage associated with floods, according to some data of United Nations. And next slide, please. Well, this problem is very, very complicated, and we're working in a specific basin rivers. For example, we have the La Plata Basin River Program, which is one of the most important programs because we're working for more than 15 years with these countries, and we're working with 5 countries with IDB cooperation from La Plata, Adaptation Fund, and in the next slide, you can see, for example, is a summarize of the results of our intervention. But I will be just mention the decision support system for La Plata Basin River, which is one of the most important results of our work with La Plata Basin countries. Sorry, a second. Okay, sorry. And the other important topic is work with the countries to develop investment portfolios. And in this kind of basin, in this kind of watersheds, it's pretty important work with every country to agree to develop an agreed portfolio, because the impacts in one country always has consequences in another one. So for us, taking these decisions are pretty important, but with a decision support system. For that reason, we create the decision support system for the La Plata Basin River. In the next slide, you will see another of our programs, which is a Trifinio program. In Trifinio program, we're working in 4 components. The first one is water resources diagnostic, and we're working with la Comisión Trinacional del Plan Trifinio to develop an integrated legal framework that will include a human rights perspective and yes. The second component is government and investment framework. As I mentioned, it's very important work with the countries to allow them to create a shared portfolio. The third component is related to pilots in water resources management and nature-based solution projects. And the last component is focusing on water resources monitoring for decision making. In this project, we're working in the development of the creation of a new decision support system for like the La Plata Basin River. And in the other slide, you will see another of our initiative, which is the capacity building program for climate action that we create with Jeff, IDB cooperation of the Green Climate Fund, and also with Costa Rica, Jamaica, and Uruguay. This capacity building program is the first capacity climate action program that includes human rights as very, very important part of the discussions, not only in the legal discussions, also in the financial discussions. And in the second, in the next slide, you will see another of our initiative, which is science and data for decision-making in tributary water in Latin America and in the Caribbean. That is very important for us because we're working with several institutions like NASA, for example. We're working with IDB using the hydrobid, which is a very, very important model to know the situation of water resources in the Americas. And also it's created to work with with policymakers. And in the next slide, you will see another of our initiative, which is knowledge management. All of them are in Spanish and English as well. We're working with gender and interculturality approach in the NDCs. We're working also with resilient infrastructure against climate change. And also we're working in in glacial basin rivers in the whole Americas. So with this initiative, we're trying to respond to the climate emergency in the Americas, in not only in national basin river, as well as in watershed basin rivers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mauricio, for that. It was great insight also on how to combine the different languages, right, and knowledge management transfer. This is also an area that we're working on, so I'm sure that we can find great synergies. Coming up next, we have just a reminder before, you have the link, okay, to the Slido platform. I already saw that we have a few questions. So if you want to share any questions, please feel free to do that in Slido. And we're going to move on now with Rosario Arnau. She's going to present YWP Spain. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marina. Well, I'm Rosario Arnau. I'm the International Relationships and Sustainability of Young Water Professional Spain. And first of all, I would like to thank all of the organizations to invite us. And firstly, I would like to introduce our network. Next slide, please. Okay, I think that some things are moving around, but doesn't matter. Okay, Young Water Professional is inside the International Water Association. And International Water Association brings together professionals and organizations involved in the water sector. Young water professionals are the persons inside the water sector which are 35 years old or lower. So Young Water Professionals is organized into different chapters that are the different countries. And in our case, we are Young Water Professionals from Spain. Next slide, please. Our main objectives are to train the new generation of water leaders, to create activities of networking, to exchange different experiences and knowledge between the new professionals and the old professionals that are in our network, and also the participation and organization of activities and events. Next slide, please. In our network, we have 550 members. And I would like to highlight as something related with the Marina foundings are that, okay, females are the 56% of our members, but in our, are 44% of our members, but in our steering committee, we are the 88%. So we have many members, but when you ask to become an active member, just the females are the ones that are there to participate. Next slide, please. We were awarded as the Best Association Award in 2020 by a media called IAGUA. Next. But this last month, we were awarded by the International Water Association as the chapter of the year 2024 because we are doing different activities. Next slide. We are participating in different international conferences, doing different tasks. We are also doing different infographics. We are doing different webinars, water meetings. Next slide. We have also collaborations with universities, companies, NGOs. We try to do also network activities, some sports, some cultural or technical routes. And we also have different technical publications in our website. Next slide. One of our best collaborations that we have in progress are the Ibero-American chapters webinars. And here in these webinars, we gather together the chapters from Mexico, Colombia, Bolivia, Ecuador, and us. I think they are all. Argentina also. We had already in 2023 3 webinars. Next slide. And this year we had already 2, and we are preparing the last one. Okay, next slide. But our best events are the national conferences. We had already 3 in Bilbao, Madrid, and Valencia. And next slide. Next month in October, we are going to have our 4th conference in Bilbao. Yeah. Next slide. So, okay, you can join us if you are 35 years old or younger and you are interested in the water sector. Next slide. Okay, so I came here to talk about how we engage the youth, and I'm going to spoil you that it is really difficult. Next slide. I would like to show you some statistics of our network before. Firstly, most of our members are from the private company, 53%, and 25% are from academia. So we don't have a representation of all the stakeholders that are in the water sector. And also, if we look at the age of our members, it is really difficult to have members that are under 24 years old. I think this is because when they start their first job, they are old. Old. They are 25 years old. They go to the job and they talk with the other workmates, and they say, "Okay, I'm from Young Water Professionals. Okay, I will join you." So yeah, I think that's why we just have a little few members that are younger than 24 years old. Next slide. So how to engage them? Next slide. Oof, this is really different from what I was preparing. Okay. In our opinion, surveys are not the best option. We think you could have the worst part or the best part of your members or the opinions. So we don't use them at all. Next. We try to create spaces for dialogue, as other speakers told before, this co-creation to plan the objectives, the priorities, and tasks together with the youth. Next slide. And to have a bottom-up perspective and not an up-bottom perspective. Next. Yep, next. And I would like to highlight talks in schools. I think they are really important to gather all these students from the beginning and not from just 20 years old. And I would like to present here the new project, Más Claro Agua. I don't have any photo because it is just starting. But in this project, master students are going to explain the water sector or the integral water cycle to high school students. And yeah, in the future, I will tell you how it is going. Next slide, please. Also, we think that citizen science is also a really good option. They love to get involved, but I think they love contests. They love to compete with each other, with other students, with other mates. Okay, next slide. And I would like to show you this device that was to monitor the water and energy consumption used in the shower. Because in this, we didn't did this project, but I would like to show you it, because the result of this project was that when you are just looking or monitoring your data, your consumption is stable, but when you are looking at the data or integrated data of your neighbors, you decrease your consumption. And that's why that's because we love to compete with our neighbors, with other mates or workmates, etc. Next slide. In the University of Jaume I in Castellón, they organized this contest to design a fountain to be installed in their university. And yeah, they get involved in this project. And as you can see, the fountains were installed in the university. Next slide, please. And I'd like to show you also this first hackathon that we organized last year. Next slide. In this case, we had 3 different challenges with the theme, the sustainable use of water as a key element in the fight against the climate crisis. Next slide. And next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, and we had these 3 different challenges. The first one was to create, next slide, to create an awareness campaign on the water cycle and climate change. Next slide. The second challenge was more technical, and could you please, okay. And it was to create an action plan to conserve aquatic ecosystems and ensure the availability of fresh water in inland areas. And next slide. The third challenge was also technical and was about making urban areas more resilient to drought and extreme weather events. Next slide. And next. Okay, we gather 48 students from master, from bachelor, and also from PhD. We gained new young water professionals, and they were under 24 years old. Next slide. And we made them to think, okay. And okay, you can swap to the next slide. I would like to tell you some of the lessons learned in the next slide. You can pass to the next slide also. Okay, one of the lessons that we have learned is that the social media are a way to communicate our message, but the social media cannot be just the only one action to make in a project. They could be just one part of your project, but not just to focus on it, because we found that they just swap to other content that they love or they think that it is more funny. And also another lesson learned is that students or youth, sometimes they get involved in all these projects that I have showed you because they are a kind of force. They are not voluntary, because sometimes this is part of the grade of their course. And yeah, thanks. This is all from my side.
Thank you so much, Rosario. I think it's quite insightful also to see what kind of initiatives and engagement tools can work better with each type of stakeholders. And the fact that we're able to have youngsters joining this conversation so that, of course, they can be a part of the decision-making and the policies that can be designed from now onwards. I think we're doing a great journey between all the different stakeholders, and now it's the turn of the private sector. So we cannot wait to hear what Marmiko has to share with us regarding the advances that water treatment and management are having currently. So Mara, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers to give me the opportunity to talk to you about what is our perspective to the future of water inside Acciona. To put you in context, Acciona is a multinational company based in Spain, but with business mainly in Latin America, Canada, Australia, and also in Europe. We are specialists in water desalination, but we also design, build, and operate many wastewater treatment plants and also drinking water facilities. So as you can imagine, we are facing the future of the sector together, hand in hand with our customers, which are mainly public administrations and governments that are the ones that have to take the decisions to improve or to keep the facilities they are now. Although I'm going to focus on wastewater treatment, most of the things I'm going to discuss, or the topics I'm going to discuss, are also applicable to desalination, because the future of water for us in Acciona is to ensure the presence or ensure the good quality of alternative sources of water in order to keep the natural sources as preserved as possible. How do we see the alternative sources? We see them as desalination and also as regenerated water coming from wastewater treatments with the proper quality in order to give ulterior use to that treated water and not just throwing it to the water bodies. So this is the particularity of the wastewater treatment and also the reclaimed water, is that we are facing three changes of paradigm at the same time in this moment. Next slide, please. The first change is mindset changing that is coming from international and also European legislations that pursue the increase in sustainability and circularity in all our society. And in the case of wastewater treatment plants, we are changing the idea of wastewater treatment plants as a place where you deposit water to a place where you obtain the resource contained in those waters. Next slide, please. So on one hand, you are not depolluting water anymore. You are obtaining a new source of clean water, of high quality reclaimed water. It can be used for irrigation, it can be used for industrial use. Even in some places of the world, they are already using reclaimed water as a source of drinking water, obviously with the proper treatment afterwards. The reclaimed water can be an appropriate instrument to solve the problem of the scarcity and drought, because it can act as an alternative source, as I mentioned before, reducing the stress over the natural water body. It's also, as I told you, this is also the idea of desalination. Next slide, please. Another aspect of the new concept of biofactories is that the wastewater is full of different kinds of resources that can be harvested. One of those are the nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus. In the previous decades, nitrogen and phosphorus were a problem if they reach the natural water body, because they lead to eutrophication and other environmental problems. But now we are focusing our technologies not in treating them, not in reducing them in the wastewater, but in harvesting them, in converting them into products that can be useful for the society. The most common application for these nutrients is agriculture. This is especially interesting for phosphorus, which is a finite resource, and in the case of Europe, there are limitations and dependencies from third countries that could be released if we recover the phosphorus we have in our wastewaters. Next slide, please. Also, energy is a pillar in this biofactory concept, because the chemical energy contained in that pollutants that arrive to the wastewater treatment plant can also be harvested and reduced inside the plant in order to reduce the carbon print of the plant itself, or exported to the net in the shape of biogas or biomethane, or in the shape of other kind of of energies, heat, for instance, or electricity. Next slide. And finally, another aspect of the biorefineries is that the biogenic carbon that comes in that pollution, in that wastewater, can be converted into bio-based products like bioplastics or other materials that can be considered sustainable and biodegradable. As you have seen, all of these pillars of the biofactory are tightly related to the SDGs, related to the water, to the environment, to the sustainable production, and also to clean energy, clean and affordable energy. Next slide. Which are the drivers of the shift? As I mentioned before, the circular economy concept is pushing towards to the changes in wastewater treatment plants, for fostering this idea also in the public administrations, which sometimes are the lowest, not the lowest, but the slowest to integrate these kinds of ideas. But it's getting into them, and they are asking for more circularity in their new wastewater treatment plants or in the refurbishing of the new ones. The sustainability goals, as I mentioned, they also are an idea that's getting into the collective mind and pushing the new goals of the new idea of wastewater treatment plant. And also technological advances are fostering this kind of changes, because if we don't have the technology, of course, we cannot do the change. But the technologies for this biofactory shift are already there. Next slide. Another paradigm change is being caused by the new urban wastewater regulation here in Europe, which is enhancing the treatment standards in order to protect further the health and environment. Next slide. For instance, they will force the wastewater treatment plants in Europe to have a secondary treatment by 2033. For me, in the water sector, it's obvious that you need a step to remove your organic matter from the wastewater treatment plants or from the wastewater. But it's not so common in the whole Europe, and in fact, in Spain, there are some places that are not getting here yet, and we are paying fines for this fact. So these basics are going to be forced to smaller wastewater treatment plants, which now are only using physical-chemical treatments or very easy treatments that don't achieve the standard quality, the standards of quality required by the new legislation. Next slide, please. This is one of the first main challenge to the wastewater treatment plants in whole Europe, is they are going to incorporate a tertiary treatment to remove those nitrogen and phosphorus we were discussing before. This is quite paradigm for me. This is quite paradox for me, because they are pushing for circular economy, but they are also forcing the elimination process in more and more wastewater treatment plants. But this is because the technology for removing phosphorus and nitrogen is well known and easy to implement. So they are pursuing that in order to save or to protect the environment. And in the following years, we will see if we can change from elimination to real recovery. Next slide. This is also an important shift, is that they are going to force to have quaternary treatment by 2045. Quaternary treatment is a more advanced technology that most of the wastewater treatment plants now in Europe they don't have yet, and they are focused on removing a special kind of contaminants that are nowadays passing through our wastewater treatment plants: pharmaceuticals, pesticides, microplastics, antibiotic resistant genes, which are called the emerging contaminants, or contaminants of emerging concern. So by 2045, we will have the obligation to implement this kind of technologies in the bigger plants, at least, and do risk assessments in the smaller ones. Next slide. related to the emerging contaminants, the new legislation also pushes for improving our monitoring methods and monitoring protocols in order to check the real presence of these emerging contaminants, to learn on time to make the good decisions towards 2045. They also include the PFAS, which are a really relevant contaminant that we found in many places in Europe and also in the United States. Microplastic, as I said before, but also viruses that are known, like the COVID, but also ones that are arising, or the ones that we thought that were eradicated and are pushing back again, like polio, or I don't know the word in English, sarampion. Someone can help. Next slide, please. And also an important concept of this legislation is that it will force for energy neutrality by that very year, by that 2045. We have to make sure that all our wastewater treatment plants are energy sustainable and in a different schemes or of renewable energies and certificates and such. Next slide. And finally, the third paradigm shift is a legislation that is already enforced, which is the minimum requirement for water reuse. This is the only legislation we have in Europe to ensure a safe reuse of that reclaimed water we were discussing. In Europe, they consider only the possibility of using this reclaimed water for agricultural irrigation, not like in Spain and not like in other countries in the world, where they rely much more in the reclaimed water. But they have established strict water quality standards. They will have to implement, with water treatment plants, will have to implement risk management plans, and they will have to implement new mechanisms for monitoring and compliance to ensure that quality. This legislation is tightly related to the quaternary treatment we were discussing before. Next slide. So as I told you before, all those paradigms are backed up by the fact that technology is already there to prove the quality of the reclaimed water. There are different technological trends that are being covered by academia, but also all the companies here in the private sector. We're talking about membrane bioreactors, advanced oxidation processes, electrochemical treatment. I don't go deep in any of them, but if you have any question or any curiosity, I can tell you afterwards. Also, as I mentioned, nutrient recovery technologies, because there's a relevant interest in the nutrient recovery aspect of wastewater treatment. Also, anaerobic membrane bioreactors that allow to harvest that energy contained in the wastewater. We are all working hard in introduce and amplify the effect or the impact of artificial intelligence in machine learning in wastewater treatment processes for virtual sensoring, but also predictions and forecasting, simulation of the processes, etc. Also microbial fuel cell forward osmosis and decentralized water treatment schemes, which is something that came from the past, but is getting again in the present, the need of diminishing the sizes of the wastewater treatment systems and adapt them to local necessities and characteristics in order to make them more sustainable. So as I mentioned, Acciona, next slide, please. Yeah. So Acciona is engaged in all this change to the future of the water sector, as I told you, hand by hand with their customers. Our first pillar is to prove them our technological knowledge, to be updated about all the new requirements and all the new technologies that can fulfill the new objectives of this new paradigm. But we also make an especially intense effort in innovation related to all this aspect we discussed. For instance, we have the Pristine project focusing on eliminating the emerging contaminants not only in wastewater but also in drinking water scenarios. So we are talking here about advanced quaternary treatment. We are doing an important monitoring effort to characterize the places we are proving or we are testing this solution in order, as I mentioned before, to have the information to take the future proper decisions towards this kind of treatments. And we are focusing on obtaining a reclaimed water that fulfills the quality of reuse. Next slide. We are also focusing on the recovery of the energy contained in the wastewater by the biogas project, in this case financed by Spanish Ministry of Industry and Science. And we are trying to convert renewable energy excedents into hydrogen. And then this hydrogen is combined with the CO2 we have in our wastewater treatment plants to produce methane, which is which is natural gas, and therefore we can obtain natural gas from our wastewater treatment plants to be used inside the plant or to inject in the network in order to have a green source of this kind of fuel, and also to reduce the dependency of Europe to third parties in order to buy this natural gas. Next slide. Again, we are talking about resource recovery in the HICAC project. In fact, we are obtaining biomaterials. That CO2 I mentioned in the project before is, in this case, it's used to obtain plastic to substitute the one-use plastics that are forbidden now by the European Commission. We are producing a bioplastic which is biodegradable, compatible with food, and but independent from oil and gas. Next slide. In the case of the phosphorus, we are again talking about resource recovery. In this case, we are focusing on phosphorus. We are trying to recover 60% of the phosphorus that gets to the wastewater treatment plant in order to produce green fertilizer. As you see, most of the phosphorus that came into the wastewater treatment plant goes to the solids that are produced in the process of cleaning the wastewater, and treating those solids can give us energy and also this kind of phosphorus fertilizer, which is vivianite. Next slide. In the case of the ACRES project, we also, again, are in the resource recovery and in biomaterials aspects. But in this case, what we are doing is to recover cellulose from the wastewater and using to formulate construction materials. In this case, we are partnering with more than 14 partners from the whole Europe, and we are not only focusing on the water sector, but also in industrial sectors like refinery, steelmaking, and lithium extraction. These are the projects that we are having active right now, but we have been working on projects related to the other technologies we have already discussed. Next slide. To sum up this presentation, I would like to still mention which are the challenges we are facing and we will have to face in the near future. Regarding governance, of course, the uneven distribution of water makes different and makes hard to take unequivocal decisions. For instance, the example of the reuse legislation is an example of that. Since the north of Europe is not so doesn't rely so much in reclaimed water, they didn't open their door to other uses of reclaimed water apart from agricultural applications. So that's an idea about how the uneven distribution can be a barrier to address the future of the sector. Regarding the organisms and the entities that control the water sector, at least in Spain, there are several unconnected levels. You have the river basin, the province government, the autonomous community level, also the government, Spanish government. So those levels that sometimes are unconnected are making difficult to address the challenges. There is a lack of stakeholder implication, as Marina mentioned, and also Rosario mentioned. Stakeholder implication is crucial to take proper decision or rational decisions and make decisions for the future, for not in a short term, and it's being really hard in different levels. There also a lack of understanding by the people, by the general public. There is a lack of understanding of how much water treatment costs, and which are the limitations, which are the technologies that can do what can be done and what cannot, and which water is safe, what we have done to obtain that safety, and also so that this lack of understanding balance some projects or some investment. Also, political interest has turned water into an asset, a political asset, which is a problem for many approaches for technological approaches, but also for investment programs. From the economical perspective, I thought at the beginning I was going to mention the technological aspect, but I changed it to economical, because what I mentioned before, technology is there. We only have to find how to finance it. We have an aging infrastructure, not only in Spain, but all in the whole Europe. And that aging infrastructure is not going to meet the new legislation. We are going to do important investment to put it up to date. The more strict legislation requires more sophisticated technologies. Simpler technologies cannot reach the levels of quality they are asking for. So more investment should be in this line also. There is a lack of political compromise. Today, the technical director of my company has spoken in a forum and has explained that only 25% of the promised financing for water projects is going to be implemented this year. Only 25%. There is also a lack of effective public-private investment tools. The private sector is willing to support the public sector in both parties agreement that satisfies both parties, or agreement that satisfies both parties. But at least in Spain, they are not much about this. And also the technologies are facing higher energy and reagent costs. That is causing a lot of troubles in wastewater treatment and desalination plants that are already in place and already in operation, because they have won the operation with an offer, and that offer has been beaten by the increase of energy and reagents. So sometimes we are losing money in operating those kind of facilities. And finally, environmental challenges related directly with the climate change. We have those episodes of floods and droughts that make it difficult to design infrastructure or to keep updated the already existing. We have to invest in more resilient systems, and it's hard to see that in the near future. There are also the higher temperature and more evaporation is over-concentrating contaminants in several water bodies, which affect, for instance, drinking water facilities. And unfortunately, circular economy is a concept that is in the mouth of everyone, but the real thing is there are not so much circular economy right now, because we are forced to recover, and we are forced to we are willing to recover those nutrients, and we are willing to recover those biomaterials, but there is not a market there yet. So we have to work more in that circularity and educating the public, but also educating policymakers and other sectors in order to ensure that circularity we are all willing to contribute to. And I think I'm done. Next slide. Thank you so much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you so much, Mar. We are almost at the time, but we actually do have a question for you that we were going to send afterwards. So we're just gonna close today with a briefing on the European Union Mission and Community of Practice. And we don't have time, unfortunately, to answer the questions, but do not worry, we're gonna share the answers per email to you all. So without further ado, I'm gonna leave you to Martina Alvarez, who's gonna close off this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be super brief, given that we are over time already. It was super interesting listening to all of the presentations. And just to let you know a little bit about what the community of practice from the Mission Implementation Platform for Adaptation is doing, you can actually see on the slide some of the activities from the community. I'll post on the chat the links where you can find more information, given that we don't have much time to go over it today. So as you know, the community does events which are open for everyone. So hopefully you can check the website and join us for some of these. We also have specific dedicated events for our charges signatories. We've done matchmaking events in the past to apply for technical assistance. We've done a peer learning program, and we're currently opening the second cycle. So if there's any charges signatory here with us, we encourage you to register. This program is super helpful and it's super interesting. You'll hear from experts directly on topics that you'll decide, and you'll be matched with other regions that are interested in those. We also have joint activities with other missions. And for the projects, if there's any project here, we also have 7 thematic working groups for projects to collaborate and exchange in joint activities and outputs. So Maria, if we can go one slide forward, and very quickly to close off, here, we would like to invite you to join our community. You can scan the QR code and it's super easy. You'll need to complete a very straightforward form, and we will receive your registration request, and then we'll analyze it and grant you access. The EU community online site is open for everyone anyway, so you can check the events that are featured there. And we will be very much happy to see you online at our further events. So thank you so much, Marina, for having us from the mission here. And well, with that, I think I will say goodbye. And back to you, Marina, for any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Martina. I think it's quite insightful to see the entire sphere and everyone who has been joining. I hope that you found it interesting, also the interaction and all the different perspectives from all the stakeholders that are tackling this very important issue. We have a few questions that we'll be answering, as I said before, per email. We want to thank you all for joining. Please feel free to reach out to us so that we can follow up on any topic. And if there are any synergies and connections that we can establish between us, that would also be great. Once again, thank you so much, and I will see you soon.